Let's pray. O Lord, we give thanks as legislators for the rich diversity of our history. We welcome the many challenges of the present. We dedicate ourselves to both the present and the future as we join in the service of Alberta and Canada. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Member for Edmonton Highlands.
And through you to members of the Assembly, a visitor from the House of Commons in Ottawa. She is seated in your gallery. Our visitor is Audrey McLaughlin, Member of Parliament for the riding of the Yukon Territory. Mr. Speaker, she's chair of the New Democrat Caucus in Ottawa. It's been a pleasure to visit with her today, and we ask her to come back again several times.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Member for Red Deer North.
A report to the special committee report presented on Friday, June 9th. This supplement will include the Standing Committee on Public Affairs with Mr. Clegg as chairman, Ms. Callahazen as deputy chairman. All members of the Assembly serve on this committee.
Government House Leader.
Ask for unanimous leave of the Assembly to deal with a motion relating to the report just presented to the Assembly.
Is there unanimous consent? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Government House Leader.
I would therefore move, Mr. Speaker, that be resolved that the supplemental report to the special committee report presented and concurred in on Friday, June 9th, 1989, be now received and concurred in, and that the committee recommended therein be hereby appointed.
Having heard the motion, those in favor please say aye. Opposed please say no. Motion carries.
Introduction of bills.
Provincial Treasurer.
I request leave to introduce Bill number 7, Farm Credit Stability Fund Act 1989. This being a money bill, Her Honor, the Honorable Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Speaker, all members are aware that in 1986 this government introduced the Farm Credit Stability Program. The intention of that program and its special fund was to provide much needed long-term financing to the farming community, reinforcing Alberta's stand that agriculture is our #1 economic priority. And in doing so, Mr. Speaker, we extended more than $1.7 billion to the farming community on 9% money. This piece of legislation responds again to that much-needed demand, extending by 2 years the date to June 30th, 1991, and adding $500 million, potentially more, to the fund.
Having heard the motion for first reading by the Provincial Treasurer, Bill number 7, Farm Credit Stability Fund Amendment Act 1989, those in favor of first reading please say aye. Aye. Opposed please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 7, Farm Credit Stability Fund Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the Honorable Mr. Johnston, is now read a first time.
Of Health Act. This act creates the new Department of Health, which will emphasize the effective and the coordinated delivery of health services for all Albertans.
The Honourable Minister of Health has moved first reading to Bill number 5, Department of Health Act. Those in favor of first reading please say aye. Aye. Opposed please say no. Carried.
Bill number 5, Department of Health Act, introduced by the Honorable Mrs. Betkowski, is now read a first time.
Minister of Tourism.
Speaker, I'd like to table the 1987-88 annual report for the Department of Tourism, Alberta Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the 1987-88 annual report of the Department of Career Development and Employment.
Mr. Forestry, Lands and Wildlife.
I beg leave to table a report of proceedings of the 79th Annual General Meeting of the Alberta Land Surveyors Association as required by statute.
Attorney General.
To table the Public Service Employee Relations Board Annual Report for 87-88 and the 15th Annual Report 1988 of the Alberta Law Foundation.
Minister of Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table copies of the 1987-88 annual reports for West Air Institute of Technology, Grant McEwen Community College, Piano College, and the Alberta Heritage Scholarship Fund.
Member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly today the 1988 annual report of the Advisory Committee on Heavy Oil and Oil Sands Development.
Calgary McCall.
Speaker, I beg leave to table the 1987-88 annual report of the Alberta Alcohol and Drug Abuse Commission.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure, sir, to introduce to you and through you to members of the legislature two school groups from Sherwood Park. They're both from the same school, the Father Kenneth Kearns School. They are situated both in the members and public gallery. We have a group of 24 students under the leadership of the teacher, Mrs. Anna Elliott, and also a group of 27 students under the leadership of Mr. Bruce Plant, and they are joined with the bus driver, Ms. Diane Critchlow. I would ask that the students and the teachers and bus drivers stand so that we can extend to them a very warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly.
Minister of Family and Social Services.
Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly 40 bright and enthusiastic students from Annie L. Gates School. They are accompanied by their principal, Mr. Ron Hitchings, and a teacher, Mr. Norm McDougall, as well as three parents, Cal Meyer, Denny Vesser, and Linda Brise. I would ask that they stand in the members gallery and receive the warm reception of this House.
Minister of Recreation and Parks.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to the members of the Legislative Assembly 26 grade 10 students from Social 10 and 13, two classes from Central High Sedgwick Public in Sedgwick, Alberta. They are seated in the members and the public gallery and are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Greg Martin, and their bus driver, Pastor Newland Herling. And I would ask that they stand and receive the cordial welcome of this House.
Minister of Occupational Health and Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a special day today for some 20 grade 10 students from the St. Joseph School in Whitecourt. Well, many of them up here for the first time, and they're accompanied by their teacher and school bus driver. They're seated in both galleries. I'd ask them to stand and receive the welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Sure. After that slight miscalculation of the 89-89 deficit by 127%, Mr. Speaker, we are definitely concerned about this Treasurer's predictions going into the next budget year. You know, he tends, Mr. Speaker, to put on his rose-colored glasses, and I would suggest he's wildly optimistic, Mr. Speaker, about oil prices. Mr. Speaker, OPEC now has lifted its overall production quotas to 19.5 million barrels from 18.5. Even at that, Mr. Speaker, there's still OPEC nations that are cheating on this particular quota, Mr. Speaker. So clearly, most economists now are saying there's going to be a downward pressure on prices. My question to the Treasurer, in view of these recent events, Will the Treasurer be reassessing what looks like a wildly optimistic projection for the price of oil, and will he be doing it during this session?
At all times receives new inputs and continuously looks for new information upon which it can recommend policies and provide information to the people of Alberta. One of the key indicators which we use in the budget, of course, is the price of oil, the $19 U.S. price. And it seems to us, Mr. Speaker, as I said in the House yesterday, that that price is fairly reasonable given the fact that we're now essentially 6 months into the calendar year and the price has held fairly stable over that period. Mr. Speaker, I think all members should know that when we do give that forecast, we are essentially providing a message to Albertans that in the best information we have, that's the forecast we're going to use. As I've indicated before, it is a composite forecast involving not just the price of oil, but also the price of gas to some extent. And Albertans then have an opportunity to judge upon which basis we make our calculations. Now, Mr. Speaker, the member can't have it both ways. I recall in 1986, across the way suggesting to us we should give the price forecast. Give us the price forecast. Give us a look at what you're doing. And so we did that, Mr. Speaker, and I think all Albertans appreciate that we're up front and give as much information as we reasonably can give so that people of Alberta can judge and provide a great deal of confidence in the forecast that we have. Without that, Mr. Speaker, I think the opposition member would be on the other side of his two-handed policy.
Speaker, we want a price projection, but we want a realistic one. That's the whole point, Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter because oil traders cited in a report published this weekend agree that Kuwait's fight for a higher production quota could soften oil prices for the rest of the year. And in fact, some of them are predicting $10 a barrel. $10 a barrel, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Treasurer is a very simple one. Is he not concerned that he's going to make as bad a projection as he did last year and be out 127% again?
Here. More.
Mr. Speaker, I watched very carefully the words of the Kuwaiti Oil Minister Sahib, who said very clearly that while they would not be bound by the production levels set by OPEC, he also said a very important fact, Mr. Speaker, and that is that in no case would Kuwait allow the price of oil to fall out of bed because of their production. And I think that's the sense that's developing among the OPEC producing members. What the member does also forget, Mr. Speaker, is that the world demand for liquid hydrocarbons, particularly in the United States, has increased more rapidly than most forecasters have believed. We have seen in our own province, Mr. Speaker, the demand for our natural gas moving to an all-time record volume production in 1988 with very firm prices. The only restraint in our export in the United States market right now, Mr. Speaker, and that's a very strong opportunity for us, as I said on Friday, is the capacity of the pipeline itself. Now, the private sector is responding to the price mechanism. The private sector is committing new investment to ensure our natural gas gets into the marketplace. And what I can say, Mr. Speaker, is OPEC now knows, Mr. Speaker, that they are as dependent upon the price of oil as is the rest of those oil-producing countries such as Alberta, and they're determined to maintain that price. Now, with respect to the forecast, Mr. Speaker, I have before me, and all members can obviously go to the same sources as I do and pick up the price forecast. The high price forecast for the last period when we did the budget was Thomas McKinnon, who forecast 19.75 for the calendar year, a higher price yet for the fiscal year ahead. Paribas, $19, Smith Barney, $18.85, Morgan Stanley, $18.50. So we're right in the middle in terms of our price forecast, Mr. Speaker. It's a matter of public record. All experts that come to this.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Provincial Treasurer. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, how many times have we heard this from this minister before?
That's right.
And the point we're making, you were out 127% last time. Why in God's name should we ever listen to you again in these projections? And, Mr. Speaker, if the price does slide, the question I have is the $10 scenario, the worst price scenario, what contingency plans does this government have if it slides to those levels, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, it must be the Monday morning blues, the member from Norwood. I mean, we do not have the same sort of doomsday scenario that the member is talking about. We've gone on to tell you already, Mr. Speaker, and through our budget presentation, that in fact the dependency on oil and gas in this province has dropped down dramatically. We have a diversification taking place in our economy. And just Friday, for example, I know the member didn't like it, but just Friday, for example, our unemployment figures came in 6.9%, the lowest unemployment number ever. What it has to do with it, Mr. Speaker, is this: that more and more revenue in our province is coming in from traditional forms of sources, The Heritage Fund provides 1.3 trillion cubic dollars, $1.3 billion. The gas prices, our volumes are up, the prices are firm, and Mr. Speaker, we're now well into the year in terms of our forecast.
Thank you very much.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, After that gabblegook, I'll move back to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the debt of this government at the end of this fiscal year is going to be close to $10 billion. This is from the great fiscal organizers across the way, the great conservative government, Mr. Speaker. But I noticed one thing that went up significantly was the public affairs advertising budget. Why, it just went up 85%, Mr. Speaker. Surprise, surprise, Mr. Speaker. And I want to ask the Premier, how can the government possibly justify this obscene expenditure in view of the serious deficit that we have, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, one of the processes that we go through in the legislature is to have committee of supply where you call each minister responsible for certain areas. There's a minister responsible for the Bureau of Public Affairs who in estimates would go into some detail the reasons for the budget and the budget growth. I only tell the honourable member that the government has a responsibility to make sure it's communicating with the people, and we're going to do that in the best every way we possibly can.
Speaker, there's no doubt that they like spending taxpayers' money, giving their message, Mr. Speaker. We saw it during the federal election, and now we're going to see some more of it. And that's the point I want to make. My question to the Premier, isn't it true that the reason you want this extra money is to give your political message in the fall, Mr. Speaker? That's what this is all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we'll see about that. We're going to watch. Just like the promises that they made before, we'll see, Mr. Speaker.
Right, every other one.
But my question then, isn't it true then, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, and I want him to think about this because we can check Hansard lately, that they want this money to begin orchestrating a political agenda which is going to lead to further tax hikes for Alberta families, and there's going to be cutbacks in people's service after that huge deficit that they've given us, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
All right, Ray.
They won't have trouble checking Hansard for this one, Mr. Speaker. The answer is no.
Mr. Speaker, we're now faced with a government that has an $8 billion accumulated deficit, and they say, trust us. We are now faced with a government that has a $9 billion liability in terms of unfunded pension liabilities. During the last few years, and particularly during the course of the election, a number of promises were made with respect to loan guarantees and loans. Those total now some $3.5 billion. This could have, Mr. Speaker, a terrible impact on Albertans if they go wrong. It is unfortunate that the government continues to refuse to release details of these arrangements. My question is to the Premier. I would like to ask the Premier whether he will continue to insult Albertans by hiding these agreements and not making the full terms of our obligations, should they go bad, known to Albertans. Would he undertake to release all such information?
Mr. Speaker, the government provides all the information that it possibly can. In some cases, the legislature decides for itself here through the motion for return system. And in each case, when those matters come up, the House judges tries to decide whether the information should properly be released. Is there some competitive or other reason why it might not be? And then we decide.
Mr. Speaker, is the Premier going to take the same line that the Minister of Career Development took with the principal matter, saying, trust me, we'll look after your affairs, and it's not necessary that you know these specific items of the agreements, and thus getting ourselves into the kind of difficulty that we did with principal?
The old mushroom theory.
Mr. Speaker, actually, in a way, the honourable member is merely repeating his first question, and I answered it.
Go on.
Mr. Speaker, would the Premier be prepared to agree, or the Minister in charge of Finance, Provincial Treasurer, that by not knowing this information and pegging a lot of these loans and guarantees to the so-called cyclical industries, Albertans could be put into terrible difficulty if things go bad?
Mr. Speaker, I understand the propensity of the opposition members to want to see things go bad. But the government has a great deal of confidence in the future of this province. It has a great deal of confidence in the people of this province. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we're prepared to take the financial muscle of the government and place it beside the people and allow the people to build this province for the future. And you can see it, Mr. Speaker, now with the billions of dollars of investment flowing into the province. You can see the confidence that's flowing across Alberta. You can see the economic statistics. You can see the unemployment statistics. And you just know, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Alberta, with the government of Alberta, are working together to build this magnificent province.
Right. Cypress Radcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture. In this Assembly Friday last, the Minister said that he would be meeting with his federal counterpart in Edmonton this morning. I wonder if he can share any information with the Assembly from that meeting this morning.
Mr. Speaker, I could confirm that the Honourable Shirley McClellan and myself met for approximately 2 hours this morning with the Honourable Don Mazinkowski and the Honourable Charlie Mayer. Discussed quite a variety of things that impact Alberta agriculture, some of which we had on the agenda, some of which they had on the agenda. Main areas of the discussion centered around the Canada-Alberta Soil Agreement, or Soil Conservation Agreement, the Western Grains Transportation Act, or in short, the change of payment process, the Canada Grains Drought Program, the Canada-Alberta Hail and Crop Insurance Program, and the Agriculture Processing and Marketing Agreement. For the last part of our meeting, the Honourable Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs joined us, and we discussed a variety of other projects important to the Alberta economy.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary to the Minister, in view of that it finally figured out how to rain along the eastern border of Alberta in the last week. I wonder if the Minister can share with us if any advancement was made on the drought insurance program with the federal government towards getting more drought money to the farmers similar to there was in Saskatchewan, and indeed what happened in the crow offset benefit negotiations.
With respect to the Canadian Grains Drought Program, I'm still confident, as I said Friday, that the federal government will fulfill the commitments that they made to our producers. However, one thing has changed since Friday. They have now opened negotiations requesting us to consider participation in the program. We, at this point in time, have made no commitments. With respect to the method of payment, basically the four options were discussed. I think there's general support for moving toward a change, especially in view of the fact that the Minister of Agriculture for Canada has stated publicly on a number of occasions that they will attempt to remove anything that hamper value adding in the industry in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, my final question, supplementary, is to the Associate Minister of Agriculture. And I wonder if the Associate Minister can inform the Assembly if any negotiations were carried on towards an enhancement of the crop insurance system in Alberta.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would report to the member for Cypress Redcliffe and to the Assembly that definitely that was discussed at our meeting this morning, and as I had indicated before, I think last week, we have had a provincial review. We now have a national review paper out. We discussed that this morning, the distribution of it, the reports that are flowing back from that, and we expect to discuss that review at our meetings at the end of July. So we did spend some time. We remain firmly committed to an improved program for our producers.
Member for Edmonton Centre, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government can't be trusted to keep its election promises of no new taxes when in the budget just last week it was announced increases in health premiums for Albertans by nearly 10%, on top of a 28.5% in health premiums just 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker. On the other hand, most provinces, including Saskatchewan, who has a gross provincial product much less than ours, charges its citizens no premiums at all. Will the Minister of Health, therefore, not agree that this flat, regressive health premium tax not only breaks promises, but is unfair to average Albertans?
No, I will not agree, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the premium is a dedicated fee for a public health insurance fund and is not a tax.
Call it what you will, Mr. Speaker. I'm just wondering further to this, though, whether in the Minister's estimates for health, for the Health Department, that it is the administration costs and the communications budget which are rising in some cases over 100% in her department estimates. Does the Minister agree that this health premium or tax or whatever you're dinging Albertans for is actually going to pay for her rising departmental bureaucracy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fact, the premium increase which is asked for by those Albertans who can afford it is an increase which is substantially less than the cost of increases that are provided through the health care fund at 16% versus 9.7%. The increase is less than the rate of inflation over the period since the last increase was called for. And I believe it's a reasonable request to ask Albertans to contribute 5 cents for individuals and about 11 cents for families towards the wonderful health system that we have in this province.
I wonder if she would use the same logic for the 28% increase 2 years ago when they cut programs. But maybe the Premier has some more compassion and more sense of fairness in this issue. How can the Premier stand in his place and be trusted when he knows that it is unfair for a family with a taxable income of $10,000, Mr. Speaker, that it is unfair for a family with a taxable income of, say, only $10,000 to pay the same amount in health premiums as a family with a taxable income of $100,000. Now, how is that unfair?
Senior citizens.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member has already had explained to him by the Minister of Health, this is a health care insurance program, and these are premiums. Might I say, Mr. Speaker, the real story that the NDP would try to have people hear is that somehow everything can be free.
Right. That's it. That's right.
Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in the Cypress Redcliffe constituency are very concerned, and particularly the citizens of Redcliffe are concerned about the glass industry in Redcliffe disappearing. The effect on a small town the size of Redcliffe would be devastating, both in terms of loss of people and the tax base that they provide. It appears the minister and the local MLA have been unsuccessful in averting the movement towards closure of the glass industry. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development. Is he aware of the seriousness of the situation in terms of economic loss of over 300 jobs and the loss of an integral part of the provincial recycling program?
Mr. Speaker, it's because of the strong representation of members such as the member from Cypress Redcliffe and in this company, and we have given them a commitment as it relates to government support so that we can retain these jobs in the Cypress Redcliffe constituency.
I understand that you've met with them, with the company, and apparently the offer was made previously. Is there a plan developed to save the plant, to keep the plant open, and keep the jobs in Alberta to keep our economy strong?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
To the Minister of Economic Development, will he treat this as a priority and work with the ministerial colleagues, including the Minister of Environment, to examine all the issues, including environmental recycling, potentially amending the Beverage Container Act to stimulate the glass industry and encourage the company to remain in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what we are doing and have been doing over the last number of weeks under the leadership of the Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what we have been doing and will continue to do, because we recognize the importance that it does play to the community involved. We are going to continue in an aggressive way to meet with management and the employees to do everything within our power to ensure that those jobs are kept within the province of Alberta.
Edmonton Jasper Place, followed by Lesser Slave Lake and Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. I was one of 15,000 people at Maycroft Crossing in southern Alberta yesterday who came a very long distance to express their concern about the environmental impact of the Oldman River Dam project. They came to seek an end to the process of political decision-making that doesn't consider environmental issues first, and that's the message. I'd like to know if the Premier has been sufficiently moved by this overwhelming public concern to change his position on the Oldman River Dam.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the honourable member has his own idea of the facts of numbers and so on and why people were there, but I would just say to the honourable member that there's no change in our position on the Oldman River Dam.
That's right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough to ignore environmental issues until they blow up in your face. In view of the importance of this matter, I wonder if the Premier has been informed of a new geological survey prepared by Robert Greggs and Associates Geological Consultants, which concludes that the instability in the bedrock structure of the dam contains a potential safety risk to the public.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows that the Oldman River Dam has had a tremendous amount of scientific study, preparation, planning, and now work going on. And we believe it's important for the people of Alberta that this dam be continued and completed. The management of something as precious as a water resource is extremely important, and the government is making sure that that happens.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in view of the possibility that this project, if the government will listen, may be halted by the courts, has the Premier at least instructed work to begin on some alternatives, perhaps scaling down the project so that something might be salvaged in the event that the courts take over where the leadership is lacking?
That question is hypothetical because the courts are indeed dealing with at least three issues. Order, please. Thank you very much. And therefore that question's out of order. Chair recognizes Lesser Slave Lake, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Speaker, this is a question to the Minister of Tourism, please. Lesser Slave Lake constituents are very interested in tourism, and I would like to know that I know that there are community tourism action plans being developed throughout the province of Alberta, and I would like to know how these plans will affect tourism in northern Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that is very definitely, very positively. Some very innovative ideas are coming forward from those community tourism action plans, not only in northern Alberta but throughout Alberta. And I might add, Mr. Speaker, there's over 110 communities have completed theirs and another 100 communities almost complete.
Second question, what tourism initiatives are occurring in Lesser Slave Lake in terms of government and as well as the private sector?
Mr. Speaker, I would undertake to provide the member from Lesser Slave with a list of projects that are coming out of the community tourism action plans and that are in her constituency. I do not have them with me, but very definitely, Mr. Speaker, the communities that are being funded by the community tourism action program that are matching that with their own dollars and then challenging the private sector groups in their community and non-profit groups in their community to achieve the goals within those action plans are making good headway. And many we don't know about that are taking place there because we've funded them at the local level for those local initiatives. But any we do have that are bigger in size or more regional in nature, we will work on a project-by-project basis with the proponents, and those are the ones I will give you a list of.
Can the minister indicate if these initiatives are being dealt with in an expedient manner?
Mr. Speaker, the Community Tourism Action Plan is a community plan. The action steps, they set their own timetable of how they're going to complete the goals in their plan, and we respond to them only, Mr. Speaker, on a request basis to facilitate them, and as I mentioned earlier, on the bigger, more regional projects, to give them a project number and to assign a facilitator and to have that facilitator work with that community or proponent, private sector proponent, to expedite that project.
Okay. Member for Calgary Mountain View, followed by Calgary McKnight, then Calgary Foothills, Edmonton Avonmore, Calgary Fish Creek, West Loch Sturgeon, and West Yellowhead. Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last December, the provincial treasurer said that Alberta would get $270 million in a stabilization payment from Ottawa. It was supposed to be so good, it was money in the bank, and he included it in estimating last year's deficit. Well, then, like public faith in conservative governments, this $270 million just sort of disappeared. It kind of faded away, and instead of $270 million, we ended up with only $75 million. To the provincial treasurer, Mr. Speaker, since this was one reason why his estimate was out by 127% last year, how can we have any confidence that Alberta will get $195 million from the federal government this year as projected in the budget estimates?
Yeah, Dick.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the member is asking for an explanation as to what happened, I'd be more than pleased to provide that to him. But if he wants to get into the normal kind of rhetoric that we see from that side, I can play that game too. I think, Mr. Speaker, being such a constrained person on Monday, I know we'll have opportunities to discuss in many forums the principles of the budget. I'll simply indicate, Speaker, it's terribly annoying to hear the chattering from across the way. The member from Highlands is always shrill in her presentation, I know. The member from Norwood is always has the blues on Monday, and now the member from Mountain View wants a lecture on how the stabilization plan works. So, Mr. Speaker, I have no choice but to give that little lesson to the member. Let me begin, Mr. Speaker, by reminding the member from Mountain View that, of course, Alberta, certainly since 1973, when the price of oil shot up dramatically, made more than its fair share contribution to the rest of Canada, certainly through oil pricing and certainly through a contribution in a variety of ways, that Alberta has always been steadfast in its commitment to ensuring that Canada has an opportunity to grow when Alberta grows. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, in November of 1981, Alberta was one of the key members of the constitutional group at that time that suggested clearly and supported wholeheartedly the concept of equalization. Equalization, Mr. Speaker, is a very important part of the fiscal federation. At the same time, so is the stabilization, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne talked about the necklace, that Alberta being the jewel in the necklace of federation. Let me go on to...
Thank you. Provincial Treasurer, I agree that Alberta is the main jewel in the necklace of Confederation, but I'm starting to choke. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to take a long speech and make it short, we have no basis to have confidence in his figure. Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Speaker why it was he included $175 million in his budget estimates when the same $195 million figure doesn't appear in the estimates of the federal government for this fiscal year.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize for the rather lengthy reply, but this issue must be put in the context of fiscal federation. And when I referred to the necklace, I was going to go on to refer to stabilization being a very unique part of the federal fiscal plan that we're into, as being the insurance policy for the jewels in that necklace, Mr. Speaker, and that's how it's operating. Let me point out, Mr. Speaker, that the contributions of Alberta have been extensive, as I've indicated, and we intend to make the fullest possible claim, protecting the interests of all Albertans under the stabilization claim. And that claim would have us receiving something over $500 million in the last numbers we produced to the federal government. And it should be noted, Mr. Speaker, as I have said time and time again, that the federal government has no need to make that payment until December of 1990. Now, through good negotiations, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of many members of this government, including support from the federal MPs, while most of the federal MPs, we have been able to commit the federal government to making a payment to us which recognizes, first of all, that the may in the legal words becomes shall. The federal government will make the payment once we come to a conclusion as to how much money is due. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, $75 million has already been received this year, and we're reflecting that in last year's calculation. Now, the balance of that, Mr. Speaker, $270 million minus $75 million equals $195 million. I'm sure even the member from Mountain View can come to that conclusion. That money is put in the budget as well, Mr. Speaker, for this year's forecast. Now, I don't have to remind the members across the way, Mr. Speaker, that December 1990 is 2 fiscal years beyond March 31st, 1990. So obviously the federal government doesn't have a provision for it, and obviously what we've had to do in terms of our negotiations is push the debate out further, Mr. Speaker. And what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the honest, fair way we presented ourselves to the people of Alberta, certainly in this past election, and received a strong endorsement from the people of Alberta, we are simply showing to Albertans how this money will be collected. Make no mistake, we will proceed with all effort to...
Thank you, Alderman. Thank you, Alderman. Calgary McKnight, followed by Calgary Foothills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, supplementary. Okay.
Speaker, I appreciate that. Alberta's claim from 2 years ago is $540 million, of which we received 13% so far, Mr. Speaker. To the provincial treasurer, what's the basis on which we can feel confident that we're going to get this remaining $444 million when the track record is so poor in this claim?
In 500 words.
Oh, to the contrary. Wouldn't they like to see us fail again, Mr. Speaker? That's really what this opposition party is about. The Premier identified it perfectly. This party is the party of failure. This is the party across the way that thrives on doom and gloom, Mr. Speaker. That's not the attitude we take, Mr. Speaker. Quite to the contrary. We are optimistic. We negotiate positions with the federal government, and we're damn determined to get that money for Albertans, Mr. Speaker.
Calgary McKnight, followed by Calgary Foothills.
Speaker, my question today is to the Premier. The Premier and his government have rightfully identified education as the key investment for Alberta's future. Unfortunately, there does not appear to be any coherent strategy to ensure that our educational institutions are capable of meeting this responsibility. For example, the government has increased support to university transfer programs in our colleges, while the University of Alberta is at the same time considering quotas on enrollment. My question is, can the Premier indicate where he believes the graduates from these university transfer programs should go when no university spaces may be available after the 2-year period?
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that the estimates of the Minister of Advanced Education will be dealt with today, and I would expect the honourable member would want to raise that matter with the Minister of Advanced Education.
Again, to the Premier, I'm not sure that my question involved monies necessarily. I was talking about provisions for these transfer students when they arrive at the university door. My second question again is to the Premier. Another problem involving university transfers is the fact that many students are not able to receive full credit for courses taken when transferring to university. What steps is this government taking to ensure a coherent and consistent credit transfer program?
Well, that's a good answer there. Mr. Speaker, perhaps I could respond as the Minister responsible for advanced education. My estimates will be before the committee tonight, and I'd be pleased to get into some detail, but I can assure the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that the government of Alberta has as a priority, its first priority, education, certainly post-secondary education, and I can assure the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that access to post-secondary institutions for certainly the year 1989-1990 are assured.
Mr. Speaker, that is not the answer to my question either. I'm concerned about the students who have taken the 2-year program at Mount Royal, for instance, and afterwards their credit is maybe not recognized and there is no space for them at the university. My third question then is again to the Premier. I believe there is clearly a need for a more rational, forward-thinking approach to post-secondary education. Will the Premier consider the creation of a non-partisan committee with representatives from business, academics, and the general public to consider the structure, funding, and goals of our post-secondary system to ensure that we are better able to meet the needs and aspirations of our young people?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises one potential avenue that a government might look at, and I, because she's raising it here in the legislature, will take a look at it for her. But I'm sure when she discusses the estimates of the Department of Advanced Education this evening with the minister, he'll be able to help her to understand better the preparation of the post-secondary institutions that will allow them to make sure that the students transferring in to the universities will have the ability to make that transfer effectively.
The Chair would like to point out something at this stage to the member who raised the questions. In terms of the rule of anticipation during question period, when we come to the estimates, it is indeed not proper to be asking questions of the department whose estimates have already been designated for this evening. And the Chair has allowed it on this occasion, but in future, as we go through working through the estimate process, questions related to that department will not be allowed to be asked in question period on that particular day. The Chair recognizes Calgary Foothills, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. There have been many concerns raised by the public and in particular in Calgary Foothills with regard to the monitoring of brokerage firms and the securities industry in general. Can the Minister advise what action he is taking to ensure that investors in Alberta are being protected?
Mr. Speaker, it's an important question and one which is being faced by securities organizations throughout the country. In Alberta, over the past couple of years, the Securities Commission has been reorganized to split the judicial function from the administrative function. There have been a series of actions taken by the Securities Commission itself to ensure that we have one of the more fair and honest operating marketplaces. And I might add for the members' interest that the Cashin report, which was put in place in January, has now given us a number of steps that we can consider for further action, some action which I expect to be announced in the not-too-distant future.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister again, in recognition, sir, of the fact that there are only 4 of the many brokerage firms that fall under the Alberta audit jurisdiction within the province, is there anything that the Minister can share with us on some form of an interprovincial information sharing package that may be evolving where there are other brokerage jurisdictions?
Mr. Speaker, the member's question is quite perceptive. There is in fact a need for complete information sharing throughout the country. in terms of the activities of stock exchanges and Securities Commission activity. We did sign an information sharing agreement between the provinces, we being the provincial treasurer and I, within a few days of my taking responsibility for this portfolio. There are as well some intergovernmental negotiations now continuing regarding what's being called harmonization, or bringing together the legislation. And as a third item, I would mention to the member that the securities administrators across the country are meeting at least twice regularly to share information and to determine action that might be necessary by joint jurisdiction that's governed through stock exchanges that cross boundaries.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister again, will the government commit to making changes to its current policy to tighten up insider trading rules so that small business investors can be assured that no one has any unfair advantages?
Mr. Speaker, there's no question that there's a need to constantly be diligent in watching our stock exchange and securities exchanges that take place in the province. The fast-moving marketplace has made it essential that we do keep up to date on action in that respect. So in the interests of that, I can tell the member that shortly, within a couple of weeks, I hope, we will be introducing legislation in the House that will deal with insider trading and with, in fact, a series of other issues related to securities and to the stock exchange.
Edmonton, Avonmore, Calgary, Fish Creek, Westlock, Sturgeon, Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard often of the Premier's commitment to the family and his numerous public statements of the importance of children being cared for by their mothers in the home, including his 1986 November presentation to the First Minister's Conference, in which he stated, "We believe the best quality child care comes at home. In view of his public stance, how does the Premier defend the current social services policy requiring the healthy mother of a healthy 4-month-old infant to seek work in the paid employment force?"
Speaker, that's a responsibility of the Minister of Family and Social Services, and ask him to respond.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of any such instance, and if the member would like to bring a specific example to my attention, I'd be happy to look at it.
Mr. Speaker, this policy was in fact addressed during the election and has been a policy in place for a number of years, approximately 1 decade. Will the Minister of Social Services then look into this policy, reevaluate it, and change it?
So again, Mr. Speaker, I assured the member that if she had an example of a specific instance, I'd be happy to look into it.
Mr. Speaker, is the Minister then saying that if in fact this policy is in place, that he will commit himself to changing it immediately?
Mr. Speaker, again, the Minister said that he would be prepared to look at a specific situation if the member opposite would like to bring it to my attention. But I'd like to talk about our commitment to the family, Mr. Speaker, because it's second to none in the nation. And I welcome the opportunity in this Assembly when they bring it up and ask the question to be able to tell them about some of the initiatives that we are taking as a government and to tell them about some of the initiatives that we're... Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows quite well that it was our Premier that brought the concern of the family to the attention of his counterparts across this nation, and it was through the leadership of our Premier that other provinces have decided that they too are going to make a commitment to the family, and it was through the leadership of our Premier that we're going to be participating in a family symposium come this July in Regina, and I can only say... Mr. Speaker, I don't apologize for the enthusiasm that I bring to this response, because we're doing some good things on this side of the House. And again, Mr. Speaker.
Your Honourable Minister. Let's now recognize the member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker,
Expired. May we have unanimous consent to carry on with this series of questions? Order, please, honourable member. Okay. Do we have unanimous consent? Opposed? Carried. Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, Well, Mr. Speaker, I regret I'm not prepared to comment in advance on the quality of the question, but I do appreciate the forbearance of our colleagues today. Mr. Speaker, at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Convention in Vancouver last week, the Federation called the impaired driving problem in Canada a national crisis and passed a resolution calling for greater enforcement across the land. Members will be aware that the Provincial Solicitor General has been quoted as favoring the immediate removal of a driver's license where a driver has been charged with impaired driving. My question, Mr. Speaker, is can the Solicitor General advise the Assembly as to what progress he's made in persuading or convincing his government associates as to the wisdom of his own personal position?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to advise the honourable member that as of last Thursday was the first introduction of our impaired driving program, or our fight against impaired driving program, when the department introduced the video entitled "The Party's Over," a video which was in fact made in Alberta for Alberta purposes. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities in Vancouver has recently addressed the matter, and while I do not concur that it may necessarily be a national crisis, there is no question in this government's mind that it is a very, very serious problem in this province as well as others. The overall strategic plan that we will be introducing covers 4 areas, which are enforcement, the education and prevention, community action, public awareness, as well as research. This is a $1.3 million program which we know will in all probability make Alberta the toughest province in Canada in which to escape drinking and driving.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if we weren't facing the tight squeeze of the bell today, I would have liked to have asked the Solicitor General for some additional details, and perhaps we can do that on another occasion. However, I would like to address a further supplementary, if I could, to the Attorney General. I'm wondering if he, Mr. Speaker, could respond to what I see as a widespread perception in our province that our courts are rendering judgments and sentences that are at times inconsistent and oftentimes far too lenient in impaired driving convictions.
Mr. Speaker, the courts and our justice system are based on the rule of law, which has as its premise that everyone that appears before the court is treated equally. On that basis, I'm not sure where the honourable member is coming from in terms of inconsistency in terms of sentencing. Our Department of the Attorney General monitors judgments. If there is a perceived significant difference from the norm, the case is reviewed on its merits to find out whether under a rule of law there was an error made. On that basis, an appeal is made. In the terms of perhaps the inconsistency is that every judge is a human being, and his perception of the evidence as it's put forward, and in each instance the evidence is always different in each case, there may be some inconsistency. On those bases, we would hope that the judiciary has the same understanding, compassion, and concern that all of us, I'm sure, in this assembly have towards the impaired driving and its seriousness as an offense.
Yes. All passed. 2 points of order. Minister of Advanced Education, followed by Edmonton Jasper Place.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the point of order, I rise somewhat reluctantly because I seem to be doing it most every day following question period. This is directed to you, Your Honor, with reference to a question put by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre, where he said, and I quote, "The Premier can't be trusted." And I draw your attention, Mr. Speaker, to Standing Order 23I, and I quote, imputes false or unavowed motives to another member.
Member for Edmonton Centre.
Would like to see the Blues. My intention was to ask how it is that the Premier can be trusted. When, for instance, in his own constituency of Stettler, there would be some who would make $10,000, others, very few others would make $100,000, and they're all taxed equally by this health premium. And so I would like to know the sense of fairness, the trust that can dictate such an unfair policy, in my view. So I was inquiring how it is that the Premier can be trusted. Now, if the Minister didn't hear the how it is part, I can't explain that, but that was certainly the intention of my question.
Well, the point of order stands, and the Chair refers all honourable members back to the discussion. Chair refers all honourable members back to the discussion that occurred at the end of question period on Friday. So that's page 166 in the Alberta Hansard, where we went on at great length about the various terms that have been used in terms of last week in the House. The Chair at that time was dealing with words such as lie, deliberately mislead, and so forth. At that time, the admonition was given to the House in terms of the various quotations and standing orders, as also in Beauchesne. And indeed, the Blues do read the member for Edmonton Centre saying that this government can't be trusted to keep its promises. That, again, it's in the next question, it's also there as well with respect to the Premier. Now, that's been ruled out of order in terms of last Friday. The Chair also heard the member for Edmonton Kingsway at one stage in the debate shouting out a similar phrase, can't be trusted. Now, honourable members, indeed there are the references, so let's go through them again. If we couldn't have time to read them over the weekend, we can certainly read them again right now. But again, under Standing Order 23, a member will be called to order by Mr. Speaker if that member, let's go on down to Section 8, makes allegations against another member, I, imputes false or unavowed motives to another member, J, uses abusive or insulting language of a nature likely to create disorder. So that's the sections from our own standing orders, which all honourable members realize takes precedence. Then Beauchesne, 491. Here we go again. The Speaker has consistently ruled that language used in the House should be temperate and worthy of the place in which it is spoken. So I'm sure you can read that again. Point of order stands. Chair now recognizes and points out on that ruling it might involve a substantive motion of the House. Chair also points out that if this continues, members are going to be called to order in question period. And if it indeed persists, then the question will be taken away. The Chair recognizes the member for Edmonton Jasper Place on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This concerns the ruling of the Chair during question period that my question to the Premier was hypothetical. I appreciate that there is a court case before the courts at the moment, and it was my intention not to ask about the case itself, but rather whether the Premier had instructed that work begin on some alternatives to this point in time. Now, I appreciate that you only get one kick at the cat. I was trying very hard to frame the question so that it would relate to previous actions by the Premier, not to something that happens in the future. And I wonder if I did err in that, if the Chair could guide me in terms of how to deal with this problem in the future.
On this particular point of order, Calgary Buffalo.
Observation, Mr. Speaker, that the question in essence seemed to be one in the nature of asking about a contingency plan. That is whether or not something might be done in future, but whether something is being done now in respect of potential events. And that seems to me to be contingency, and contingency questions of necessity have to be in order, Mr. Speaker. We wouldn't be able to ask about anything in relation to future.
On this particular point of order, indeed we were trying to, the chair was trying to follow very closely, as in the case with all the questions, but in this case with regard to the, I could almost use the word treacherous waters, of having to deal with a matter which, as far as the chair knows, has about 2 or 3 court cases somewhere in progress. And indeed, in the way that the last question was phrased here, does seem to involve a lot of hypotheticals. Has the Premier at least instructed work to begin on some alternatives, perhaps scaling down the project so that something might be salvaged, in the event that the courts take over where the leadership is lacking? And in the opinion of the chair, that indeed was a hypothetical. But the chair agrees that it's very difficult to try to deal with issues in this matter because of the sub judice convention, and also in this case it was the opinion of the chair that it was a hypothetical, so the chair will try to listen even more closely in future. Thank you. Point of order on which issue?
I am somewhat concerned that we're going beyond Beauchesne in terms of what is legitimate in terms of slogans or phrases that one can use. Certainly governments can't be trusted, Mr. Speaker. That's a new one that we find that unparliamentary. And I know under that one section you can almost say that anything's imputing motives. The Treasurer certainly imputed motives, and I just take that as a give and take of the session.
Hear, hear.
And one of the things that we want to do and believe strongly on this side is that this government can't be trusted, Mr. Speaker. And and that's a political point that we're trying to make. We don't think that should necessarily stop us from political debate, because where does it stop? Pretty soon the only thing we'll be able to do is stand up and tell them how wonderful they are to get a question carried through, Mr. Speaker.
The chair is indeed willing to receive representations from House leaders in terms of this whole area, but with respect to this point of order, the chair has to point out that under Beauchesne 318 subsection 1, a point of order cannot be raised on a point of order, but the general issue might be valid discussion material for the House leaders with the chair.